Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my NACL Finals overview and analysis video. We've finally done it. We've gotten through every single game in the NACL this year, and it has all led up to this point, the Summer Split Finals in the NACL, the final games of the Tier 2 system here in North America in 2023, and I just want to say thank you, those of you who have been along for the ride for the entire time. I really appreciate it. Obviously, if you jumped on the ride at any point, again, I also appreciate you a lot. If this is your first video, welcome in. Hopefully you like my analysis, hopefully you like the format, but we're going to be going over the finals in today's video. Only two teams remain. One of them will be crowned the NACL champions. Both of these teams absolutely deserve to be here. The road to get here in the playoffs was not easy, was not simple for either of these teams, and so whoever comes out on top is absolutely going to have earned it up until this point. But of course, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought was going to happen in this series. Which team did you see coming out on top and why? Did any players impress you? Did any players not impress you? And what do you think the future for a lot of these teams and players are? Obviously, there are a lot of rumors circulating right now about potential LCS slots opening up, and so we'd love to know you guys' thoughts on all that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. If you are new to the channel, what we're going to do here is a little bit different than what we've done in the other NACL videos. This is going to be a lot more familiar to those of you who watch my content on the major 4 regions. We're going to go game by game in the finals, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I will be giving a player of the game for each individual game, and at the end of the series, I will also be giving out a finals MVP award. Of course, I will briefly touch on everything at the end of this video, but today's really just about the final series in the NACL, and I could not be more excited. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Of course, it is going to be a matchup between the number 3-seeded Disguised and the number 7-seeded Evil Geniuses Challengers. Not really the two teams that I think most people expected to be seeing here in the finals, but both of them have more than earned their spot. DSG not having lost a series up until this point in the playoffs, taking down some really big names. FlyQuest, chief among them. Cincinnati Fear in a reverse sweep was an absolute blast of a series and a very, very close one for this team, but Evil Geniuses has more than held up their end of the bargain to get here as well. They also took down Fly. They also took down Fear, but they also took down Team Liquid Challengers, which was a really, really big win for this EGC team, and both of these teams kind of confirming that at least in their current form, they are the two best teams in the NACL at the moment. Both very, very fun, and both deserve to be here. Now, as for this matchup, DSG is rightfully going to be considered favorites, I think, by a lot of people going into this series. I think the lack of losses for them in the playoffs have certainly increased kind of the perception of what this team is able to accomplish, and that's absolutely true, but Evil Geniuses has been up against the wall the entirety of the playoffs, coming in as the second lowest seed in the entire tournament, only to make it all the way here to finals. They basically made this gigantic lower bracket run, and you've got to give them a lot of credit for that. They've been the underdogs every single time, and yet they've always overcome the expectations. Who's to say they can't do the same thing here? Players like Surdy and King, I think, are playing at a really high level. Ryoma, in that same vein, Armeo has really stabilized this team. Smoothie's been playing his best league of 2023, and so I really do think EG is a team to look out for, but DSG is a very dangerous threat. Fake God, Tomio, Zazel, 3 of the most experienced players at this level in terms of winning, not only at this level, but at many levels. And then, of course, Young and Meech kind of brought in as these big prospects, and both of them have absolutely delivered over the course of this split. Who's going to be the hero, and who's unfortunately going to go home in second place? Well, we're going to find out here, because we get to start with our game-by-game analysis with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Disguised. They are going to be able to take the first game of this series, DSG going up 1-0. I talk about this a lot in my other series, my other recaps for the other regions. Game 1 is arguably the most important game in the series. Games 1 and 2, and then Game 5, in my opinion, are the most important games in the series by a large margin. You need to be able to generate that confidence. You need to be able to generate that momentum, and that's what DSG was able to do in this first game. They came out swinging, and they dominated this first game. They definitely were the better team, basically by every single metric, and honestly, it was everybody on the team that really stepped up. You could highlight basically literally any one individual player and find multiple moments throughout the game where they played exceptional. Now, unfortunately for Evil Geniuses on the other side, it's basically the opposite. You could highlight basically any player and just be like, not exactly a standout game from any of them. Obviously, this team kind of upsetting their way into the finals. It does look, at least in game one, like they were a little bit overmatched, a little bit outplayed in game one, but of course it's only the first game. We can talk about some of the things that they could do to potentially get back on track. But first of all, for DSG, my player of the game for game number one is going to go to Zazel in the support position. It's never particularly good when your support rel does just as much damage as the enemy mid laner, and that was unfortunately the case in this game. Zazel was awesome, engaging consistently over the course of the entire game, setting everything up for either the Xayah or the LeBlanc or the Kindred, basically, to really capitalize and create a lot of advantages. I think without Zazel, this game would have been a little bit slower. I'm not going to say that they would have lost, because everybody else, I think, also absolutely did their part, but I do think that this game would have been at least a little bit harder for DSG had they not had the reliable engage coming out from this rel. I think Meech had a fantastic game. He was dealing a ridiculous amount of damage. I think Young ended up topping out the damage chart, but you're just kind of bound to do that on LeBlanc. I think that is almost just a given. It's basically impossible to not max out your damage on LeBlanc, especially if the team is going to be winning, but Young's very good at these hyper-mobile assassins. That's kind of his calling card, right? The Akali is definitely the pick that comes to mind the most when it comes to Young, but the LeBlanc is still obviously very high prio, and it's a very good pick in the meta right now. Even going into something like Lissandra, that's considered a counter pick. If you're just the better player and if you can establish pressure early, then there's really not a lot that Lissandra can do. On the other side, Fake God and Tomio were both really good. Fake God especially, in my opinion, I thought had a great game. He has pretty clearly been the best top laner in the NACL. Surdy has been really good. We'll talk about him in a second, but Fake God just feels like he's on a little bit of a different level right now in terms of especially what he's able to accomplish towards the back half of games. And so, really good game number one from DSG. They basically did everything they needed to do in order to establish dominance in this series. And for Evil Geniuses, it's about as disastrous of a start as you can expect, but this team can be rather streaky, so I don't want to sit here and overreact to potentially one bad game. You know, we've seen players like Ryoma and King be relatively inefficient when they're not playing at their best. Unfortunately for them, usually that's kind of a day-to-day thing. You're kind of hoping that you get the good versions of these players today, because obviously it's the last series of the year. You need to get the good versions of them, but they were not necessarily present, I will say, in game number one. Dead of the game for me is going to go to Ryoma in the mid lane. It is never a good sign, like I've talked about, when your mid laner is doing just as much damage as the support rel on the other side of the map. Lissandra felt entirely useless this game. I do like the pick, and especially if you're going to play into someone like Young, who's very good at these mobile, bursty assassins on the other side. Lissandra just gives you so much more flexibility into something like LeBlanc in the late game team fights because of the instant lockdown. You also have potential ways to get on Kindred, which could be a problem if the Kindred starts spiraling out of control. The problem is that Ryoma was just so useless, and the damage that comes out from Lissandra is just so minuscule at this point that there really isn't a ton of reason to actually use her in the game. And you could say the same thing for a lot of this comp. I think they are pretty low damage, especially if the Viego doesn't get online. Varus is a good AD carry, and someone who I think does offer you quite a bit and can be a hyper carry towards the end of the game from super far ahead, but usually you'll see Varus with a pretty high damage mid laner to kind of complement the fact that Varus from behind is basically just a poke mage, and even then, it's not really all that efficient. And so, I don't necessarily love the idea here. I get it, right? But I think the concept is kind of poor, and again, I think you're really relying a lot on the Viego being able to get strong in the late game here, but the problem with that is that especially if Kindred is able to generate any sort of lead in the early game, all of a sudden this Viego has a much more difficult job ahead of him, and every lane lost, that's also not going to be particularly good. But I do think that you're staring down the barrel of like a team that just will outfight you towards the back half of the game, and unfortunately that ended up being the case. Surdy's been awesome, but couldn't quite hang up on the Renekton into Ornn matchup, which we've seen globally over the course of a couple of weeks be super Ornn favored in the playoffs, basically in every region. Just in general, it felt like Evil Geniuses didn't have a great answer here on red side, which is intriguing, but they're now moving over to blue side, so you've got some hope there. Blue has just kind of been better over the course of this patch, and I think they definitely have some tricks up their sleeve. We know these players can get rather creative and rather aggressive. I would expect Evil Geniuses to not lie down and just get absolutely destroyed, but DSG definitely taking a strong lead in this series. They are absolutely looking to win game number 2, though. Obviously, I talk about game 1 and game 2 being very important. That's because going down 0-2 in a series is basically a death sentence. You don't want to have to reverse sweep a really good opponent that clearly has your number on the day. It is possible, as DSG has already shown. shown. But Evil Geniuses certainly don't want to have to win 3 of 3 against DSG. So this is a big game 2 for them. Are they going to be able to take it, or is DSG gonna establish utter dominance over this series? Well, the winner of game number 2 was DSG. They are going to take game number 2 here. They're going to go up in this series 2-0, and this is a big, big win for them. Obviously, reverse sweeps, like I said earlier, are not impossible. We've already seen this Disguise team do it once in this playoff run, but having DSG in particular be up 2-0 is certainly a monumental feat for Evil Geniuses to have to overcome. This is a very, very big win for DSG, and it puts them 1 game away from being your NACL Summer Split champions in their first ever split in League of Legends, which would be massive, obviously. There's a major fan base rooting them on and cheering for them and hoping that they can pick up the victory, but Evil Geniuses, hopefully, is not going to go down without a fight. I do think this game was closer than game number 1. Game 1 was an absolute rout. Like, it was a stomp. There really wasn't a lot of fighting back that they could have done. Evil Geniuses tried to keep this one close, mostly because they just had a lot of ways to delay the game. You've got Jay Shock Blast, you've got Ziggs just in general in the bot lane, and so a lot of ways to keep this game rolling as long as possible, quite frankly. And DSG, while their comp is really good in the back half of the game, they don't necessarily deal with range all that efficiently. You're really relying on the Rel engage to try to make things easier. Now, obviously, a Renekton flank or potential Poppy flank could actually be massive in a fight like this, but outside of that, you really just need time to set up a Azir and a Felios, and so it took a little bit longer than I think some people anticipated. Evil Geniuses did a good job of trying to get dragons, trying to make sure that that was a priority, but DSG was everywhere on the map and was consistently winning the fights that really mattered around things like Baron, and so they were able to get the win, and a lot of it, again, is off the back of this bot lane, who continues to play incredibly well. I actually really debated who to give player of the game to. I'm going to give it to Meech this time on the Aphelios. It felt like he was the most important player in this game. He's just so good, man. Like, mechanically, he's as good as any other AD carry in the NACL. That includes Masu, that includes, King on the other side of this map. The AD carries that I think a lot of people would say have been the best over the course of this split. I think Meech is right up there mechanically with anybody, like an upper mid-tier, like LCS caliber, mechanical player. I think sometimes he can be a little inconsistent in terms of what he actually puts out, but you put a good team around him that's going to be able to set him up. I do think that he plays better the better his teammates are playing, if that makes sense, and I think this was another example of that, where as long as his teammates are setting him up, he's going to look like the best AD carry in the entire league, because nobody capitalizes on positive situations quite like Meech does, and I still think he's an incredibly talented player. Maybe not quite as finished of a product as I think everybody wants to say. I think a lot of people would expect him to be able to come into the LCS and be like a top 3, top 4 bot laner in the same way that someone like Masu would. I'm not necessarily sure that I'm on that same wavelength as everybody else, but Meech is still incredibly talented, and he had a really, really good game here. He's been great through the first 2 games, and then so has Zeyzal. I mean, Zeyzal has really been the best player on this team through the first 2 games. 2 games of Rel, and both of them were fantastic. Talked about him just absolutely obliterating EG in game number 1. Well, he did something similar in game 2. Now, it wasn't quite as proactive, and that's why I didn't end up giving him the player of the game, but I still think a lot of the major fights that ended up happening kind of rode through Zeyzal on this Rel, and I think he's so integral towards what this team is doing. I think he's kind of fallen into kind of more of a background role in terms of popularity because of just the, I guess, explosiveness of players like Meech and Young and Tomio and Fake God. Basically, everybody else on this team is a little bit more explosive, a little bit more eye-catching than what Zeyzal is able to do, but you give him an engage threat that can really change the game like Rel can at the current moment, he's really going to make work of that, and so good stuff from him. Young was really good. Tomio was by far the better jungler in this game on the Poppy, and Fake God was solid on the top side, not necessarily dominating, but still good enough. Overall, DSG just looks better basically everywhere across the map, and, there's really not a lot of negative I can say about them right now. But for Evil Geniuses, again, your back is very much up against the wall at the current moment. You are 1 game away from having your season end, from going down 3-0 in the finals, which is not really, I think, what you wanted to do. Obviously, you're happy to be here, but you want to at least put up a fight. And so far, it's really not been a fight. Like, Evil Geniuses, at least 1 lane in every single game has been absolutely destroyed, or 1 matchup, I should say. And this one, in my opinion, it was the jungle. Dead of the game is going to go to Armeo. Still like him as a player, and obviously I do think he's helped out this Evil Geniuses team a lot by joining them and creating a lot more of a consistent environment, but Tomio looks awesome. Like, Tomio's a really, really good player, and Armeo, he's historically struggled on things like the Sejuani. Obviously, I joke, but I do think that this wasn't a very good game. Like, there really is no other way to say that. that he lost a lot of pressure early. And even in a lot of the late moments where they were starting to get some objectives, they were starting to get some dragons, they never were able to actually finish these fights because you really have to rely on the Sejuani for the Jace and the Ziggs to actually matter, right? You're talking about a lack of consistent damage over the course of a fight. I mean, unless Jace is super fed, which in this game he just wasn't. And so you're relying on Sedge to be able to set things up so that you have the time to be able to get all that Ziggs damage off, so that you have the time to potentially get multiple Jace, Qs and E's off. And I think that Armeo, unfortunately, just kind of folded like paper in a lot of the major fights. Surdy has been consistently worse than, what he's been, I think, throughout the rest of this split in this series. Ryoma's fine. He was just whatever on the Jace. A couple of good moments. King and Smoothie are by far the worst bot lane in this series. It certainly is noticeable to see the difference between the two teams, but just in general, it really does feel like EG is kind of being outclassed at the current moment. Hopefully they can at least pull it back for one, but, their season's on the line, and I think they want to go out with a bang rather than a whimper, and they've got the opportunity here in game number 3. Obviously, if you want to start making that reverse sweep, you've got to start it here in the 3rd game, but if DSG is going to be able to win it, that's going to be a clean 3-0 sweep, really proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are the best team in the NACL. So, are they going to be able to close it out, or is EG going to be able to, at the very least, put up a fight? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Evil Geniuses. They are able to take game 3. They're going to keep this series alive at the very least for one more game. And this is what we wanted. We didn't want an absolute blowout. We wanted at least one game where Evil Geniuses showed up and showed what they could do, showed the reason that they got here in the first place. They finally get to play on stage in LA. These players have all kind of practiced and trained for this moment. And for EG to come out and not look good in the first 2 games, I think would have been really disappointing if they had just kind of bowed out in 3. And, obviously it would have been a nice coronation, but really nice to see Evil Geniuses continue to play hard, even when their backs are very much against the wall. As I've said multiple times throughout this video already, I'm sure you guys are sick and tired of that phrase, but we can talk about the game. I do think that there were a lot of positives to take away. I think almost everybody on EG really did step up. Still a little bit of concern about some particular picks that I'm just much lower on in terms of what they've been able to do, but I think DSG also had a couple of players that played well, even if, not the entire team played well, in my opinion, and we'll get to them in a second. But for EG, pretty easy choice for player of the game for me. Actually, I shouldn't say easy, because there was, a little bit of debate, but for me, it really came down to player of the game going to Surdy in the top lane on this K'Sante. Obviously, K'Sante is a ridiculously broken champion. Just the amount of tools that K'Sante has in his kit is more than any other champion in the game, right? He can just do more than everyone else. You get so much more bang for your buck by picking K'Sante, even when his numbers are relatively low, kind of like they are right now. They're just kind of average numbers, but his kit makes him super strong. And Surdy, I think, piloted it really well. We've seen players really struggle on K'Sante when they're not comfortable with the champion or when they're into matchups that they don't know nearly as well. K'Sante can struggle a bit early, and especially into something like Renekton, especially into Fake God. That could be something that could be punishable on the side of DSG, but Surdy's really, really good, and he's a big reason why this team is in the finals in the first place. I know a lot of people are going to look at some of the more veteran pieces on this team, Armeo coming back down from Evil Genius's main roster, Ryoma and King kind of being, NACL staples at this point, even a player like Smoothie, who obviously has been to Worlds and has had a lot of time in the LCS, but Surdy is one of the biggest reasons why this team has made the finals, and I've argued that quite a bit. I think without Surdy, this team is not a top 2 team in the league. I would definitely make that argument, and he continues to show his worth here, even if he hasn't been perfect through the first 2 games of the series. I think this game 3 is really nice to know, like, okay, he is the player that we all kind of hoped he would be, the player that we all kind of thought we were getting in the top lane, but rest of the team was also good. King and Smoothie had easily their best game of the series. We'll talk about Meech in a second. He did his best to try and pull back some damage towards the back half of this game on a really strong Zeri pick, but King and Smoothie were just kind of better in this game. The Xayah and the Alistar is going to be a lot stronger in the early game than the Zeri and the Rakan. It's going to give you a lot more prio, and therefore King was able to develop his lead a little bit earlier. By the time Meech started to get online, King was way too strong to actually be able to deal with, and that ended up being a problem. The Alistar is just a really good pick from ahead, really consistent engage, is very difficult to take down and actually deal with, and especially when you're playing into more of a scaling comp with the Azir, with the Zeri, in the mid game, it's actually really hard to deal with this Alistar if he's going to play aggressive with some of his engages. So good stuff in the bot lane. Ryoma was solid on what I would consider his signature Syndra. I would say that's probably his most notorious pick. I know that Tristana in recent weeks has definitely been the thing that a lot of people are pointing to, but I think over the course of his career, it's obviously the Syndra. He's played it, I would assume, by far the most. It's the champion that I remember him the most on, and he had another really good game here. It's been banned out a couple of times in this series, but he finally gets an Game 3, and he looks solid. The one player that I am a little bit concerned about is Armeo in the jungle. He's good. Like, I certainly don't think he's bad, but Nocturne's just not good, man. Like, I know that people are really starting to gravitate towards this pick because it does combo pretty well with some of the strong mid laners in the game right now, and especially if you're going to have a strong diver in the support position, something like an Alistar, then you have opportunities to set that Nocturne up. But I'm just so much lower on the output of this champion. It seems like you're almost always trading 1-for-1 with Nocturne, and I don't really understand why you would take that when you can have tons of other picks in the jungle right now that I just find to be exceptionally strong. Like, maybe there's just something I'm not seeing with Nocturne, but I'm really not a huge fan of the pick in comparison to a lot of the other major junglers, and I think Armeo kind of showed that off in this game where he was just kind of good. It was the rest of the team that really was carrying. But for DSG on the other side, you're not going to worry too much about this loss. You were already up 2-0 in this series. Losing game number 3 certainly isn't the end of the world. However, you do need to pull away some things from this game, say, this worked, this didn't, we might want to move in a different direction. I think this comp was just a little bit too slow. You're really relying on the Rel in the early game to just be super active and create basically everything in the game for DSG, and that just wasn't going to be an easy job with the Nocturne on the other side, and especially with like Xayah and Syndra, who are just both incredibly safe and can keep themselves incredibly safe over the beginning part of the game. There really isn't a lot of avenues for Rel to be all that consistent in terms of the gank path, and then if you're relying on the Azir and the Zeri to actually be able to duel in the mid game against Syndra, against Xayah, against Nocturne, it's not going to be nearly as good. Nobody's there to kill the Alistar, and that became a pretty big problem. My dead of the game is going to go to Young in the mid lane. The Azir's fine, and I like Young, but he just kind of got outplayed by Ryoma here. The pressure on the side of Evil Geniuses was definitely in favor of the mid lane here, where Ryoma could really do whatever he wanted. The Syndra was actually a really big deal, and while I do think Meech did a pretty good job to try and draw some stuff back towards the back half of the game, you know, Zeyzal was pretty far behind at that point. Alistar was just honestly stronger than him at that point, and really didn't, you know, it did his job better, quite frankly. And then Fake God, you know, he wasn't going to be able to keep up with the Cassante towards the back half of the game. And so, you know, with Young behind, with Fake God behind, you know, Zeyzal behind, it didn't really matter that you had, you know, the Rel plus the Zeri. There really wasn't a lot of ways to keep that Zeri alive and to keep her, you know, to keep the enemy off of her, if you will, with the Alistar and the Syndra and the Nocturne. So, good stuff from Evil Geniuses. They played this comp really well, but their job is not done. Yes, they took game 3, but if they do want to complete the reverse sweep, you got to take game 4 as well. The comeback could be real, but this game 4 is definitely going to tell us. And for DSG, you know, as much as I'm saying it doesn't really matter all that much that you lost game 3, you certainly don't want to lose game 4. You don't want to be moving into a game 5 having just lost both of the last 2 games. That's where momentum and confidence can really start to plummet. So is DSG going to be able to say, well, we gave you game 3, but we're going to close it out here, or is Evil Geniuses going to force a shocking Silver Scrapes game 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was DSG. They are going to take game number 4. They are going to take this series 3-1, and they are your 2023 NACL Summer Split champions, and they absolutely deserve it. This is the best team in the NACL. I don't even think it's really all that up for debate. Yes, I guess technically speaking, they didn't have to go through like Team Liquid, but Evil Geniuses did, and Cincinnati Fear did, and DSG was able to take out both of those teams, and so, no, I don't think there really is a lot of debate as to who the best team in the NACL is. It's DSG. It is Disguised, and for this org to be run by Disguised Toast, to bring so much publicity, so many eyes onto the NACL product, which obviously, you know, eyes don't particularly matter. Development matters more than viewership, but viewership's obviously good. It, you know, gives Riot an excuse to invest resources into Tier 2, which is all we've ever really asked for. But for them to be good, let alone be, like, popular, that is massive for the league. For this team to be able to come in and compete immediately, for Toast to be able to assemble a roster that was as good and as competitive with as much upside as DSG had this split, it's just all perfect. Like, you couldn't ask for a better ending to Summer Split. This is everything that the NACL could want, and hopefully it does good for the league in the future. Now, obviously, there are always going to be rumors surrounding DSG and surrounding the LCS just in general because of the way things have worked out in recent years. We know that there's going to be at least one spot available because presumably TSM is gone. But obviously, who knows? There could be more than one spot available, and DSG is always going to be kind of in the news for being able to pick that up. But what they did here in the NACL, I think, is what matters right now, and that's what really should be praised. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game and player of the series for me as a whole is going to go to Meech, the AD carry here. What a turnaround from a player that I had been lower on, I guess, you know, technically lower on, I guess, than a lot of other analysts. I talked about how I'm right there with everybody else in terms of the mechanics, but the consistency hadn't always been there, to Finals MVP 50-50 in my eyes. I think broadcast ended up giving it to Zeyzal. It absolutely should go to one of the members of the bot lane. I honestly don't even care which one it goes to. Both of them were so spectacular over the course of these 4 games that it really just is a no-brainer to me. If it doesn't go to Meech, then it should go to Zeyzal. If it doesn't go to Zeyzal, then it should go to Meech. It's whoever you ended up preferring, but Meech was awesome specifically on the Aphelios in this series. I think that was really the big pick, and Zeyzal was just good in general. Got Rel for most of the series, but showed up on Nautilus here in game number 4, and they were dominant. They won lane basically every single game, and they were able to translate that pressure into dominant late-game teamfighting. I mean, Meech was actually a menace to have to deal with across this entire series. And so congrats to Meech, congrats to Zeyzal. I thought both of them were great. Tomio was the other player that I think really showed up in this series and really played incredibly well. Armeo actually had a very rough series, in my opinion, especially in comparison to like what you maybe would have expected from Armeo. I think Tomio was just straight up better in basically every game today, and I think that's a little bit of a surprise, but not really. It shouldn't be. Tomio is that good, and we've known he's been that good, and so really good series from him. Young was solid. I think he was a little rough in game 3, but outside of that, I think he was good and definitely benefited this team. Fake God was good on the top side. Surdy did his best to try to keep it in check, but this was a bot-focused series from DSG, and that's one of the best things I think you could possibly hear when you're looking at the upside of this team. You know, not that Tomio or Fake God or Young or Zeyzal don't have upside, right? But Meech is like a potential all-pro in the LCS if he can just get everything together, and I think he really showed that off in this series. And then for Evil Geniuses, it's the end of the line. Your season is obviously done, having lost in the finals, but to even have made the finals in the first place has to be considered an accomplishment. This team was bad in spring. They ended up being a bottom 4 team in spring. People don't remember that. They were in the relegation tournament. Well, I mean, I guess they weren't technically in the tournament because the challenger team couldn't get relegated, but like, they were a bottom 4 team in spring. If they were, you know, eligible to be relegated, they would have had to play for relegation, not just, you know, in a 10-team league. In a 16-team league, they were bottom 4, and then you fast forward into summer, and things don't really look all that much better. You're still seeing a lot of the inconsistencies. You're seeing them beat good teams, but you're seeing them lose to bad teams and not really be able to generate anything. And then Surdy comes in the top lane. Armeo ends up coming in the jungle for the playoff run, and they find themselves streaking all the way into the finals. They couldn't quite get the job done, but I still think that the season has to be considered a success. Game number 4 wasn't particularly good. Ryoma, I think, easily had his best game of the series here in game number 4, and I think Surdy continued to be solid. Armeo had a couple of good moments. King wasn't an absolute disaster, but there really just weren't a lot of positive, aggressive plays. The ones that were attempted to be made were by the support. Smoothie, who is going to get my dud of the game because nobody else followed up on a lot of his aggressive plays. Look at this comp. What does Rel do here? Who are you setting up for? Yeah, Rel goes in. Awesome. Azriel fires off a Q. Syndra tries to get her burst combo off. You can maybe get one person. Like, I don't really know what the point of this draft was, but it didn't necessarily work out. And I think Smoothie was unfortunately the one who had to pay the price for that, but at the end of the day, I think all 5 of these members should be incredibly proud for how they played. You know, players like King and Ryoma have been in the system for such a long time. King, a player who's never gotten a shot at the LCS. Ryoma, who hasn't gotten a shot at the LCS level in quite a long time, both proving that they are good enough to at least be considered. You know, a player like Armeo obviously got a ton of time at the LCS level and did fine, but really started to make his mark back here in the NACL. And then Surdy, I mean, has really emerged as one of the best top laners in the NACL. He's somebody who I could see going to the LCS very shortly if he continues to play at this level. He really impressed me, probably the most of anybody on this entire team, this entire split. King was a very close second. Actually, King might be number 1. Surdy and King were awesome, and I think those two deserve LCS spots, and everybody else was also good, but unfortunately for Evil Geniuses, it just wasn't good enough. DSG, of course, picking up that win. They're going to be your 2023 Summer Split champions, and they're going to hold that title with pride. All right, but that is going to do it for my NACL Finals overview and analysis video, and that's going to do it for my NACL coverage in 2023. That's going to be it. That's the end of the line. Disguised is going to be walking out as your champions, as you can see on your screen, but everybody deserves a round of applause. This was one of the most fun splits of Tier 2 North American action that I can remember, whether NACL or the Academy League or even before that the Challengers League, whatever it was. This is one of the most fun splits that we've ever had, and I think there are so many young players and so many players that have stood out that absolutely are going to get some looks because of this league, and obviously with everything going on in the NACL, it's just good to see the talent pipeline continue to roll on, even if Riot, you know, continues to choose not to invest in it nearly as much as us fans may want them to. But I really do hope you guys enjoyed the coverage over the course of this year. I'm not entirely done. If you want more, I guess, Super K-Man Rocks videos, they're all going to be up on the channel. I cover all 4 of the major regions as well, and so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go ahead and check check out all of those videos. Everybody's in the playoffs right now with the exception of the LPL, who's obviously already wrapped up, but go ahead and check out the videos on all the other regions. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people. And of course, if you are going to stick around and watch a lot of those other videos, hit subscribe. I post basically every day and a lot of times over the course of the last month, multiple times a day. It's been a brutal schedule, but I really do appreciate you guys sticking with me through it. Hope you guys enjoyed all of the videos, but with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.